This is the Digital Factory Podcast. I'm John Brunner. This is the second in a series of interviews from IMTS, the big manufacturing conference that happens every 2 years in Chicago. We've got three people with different backgrounds to comment on what they saw at the event and to talk about the future of manufacturing. Be sure, by the way, to check out the Digital Factory report, which is available at digitalfactory.xyz. The report takes a look at some recent advances in artificial intelligence, automation, and additive manufacturing, and it also goes through some of the new business models that are arising as a result of progress in those fields. You can download the Digital Factory report for free at digitalfactory.xyz. So I'm here with Zach Kaplan. He's the founder and CEO of Inventables, based in Chicago, which makes CNC routers, as well as the software that controls them and materials that go in them. Zach, great to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
So you and I were just walking around the IMTS, giant trade show in Chicago this afternoon. We were admiring a lot of incredibly expensive machine tools.
Yes.
That begin somewhere a little under $100,000 and go up from there. And the way that they're all presented is kind of like, we have these incredible specs, and they're a little bit better than the previous specs that you've been working with. In your view, is that the direction that digital machining is really taking?
No.
Tell us about that.
So there was an Apple ad when they first launched the iPod, and the ad said 1,000 songs in your pocket, Mac or PC. Now, if you look at the other ads at the time, it was what were the other MP3 players, like the Creative Jukebox? We've forgotten all of. They've been relegated to the dustbin of history. Right. So the Microsoft Zune.
Oh, sure.
Right. So they were all, we have 3 gigabytes, 4 gigabytes, 5 gigabytes. But like normal people did not know what a gigabyte meant in terms of how many songs it could hold.
Right.
So I think that same kind of transition is happening right now, where the establishment industry is talking about speeds and feeds and rigidity and all of these technical things. And this whole new class of companies are coming up, and they're like, obviously the machines have those specifications, but that's not how they're thinking about, and that's not how they're talking about these concepts. They're thinking about what can someone who maybe isn't in the establishment industry, what could they do with their machine if they had access?
So you mentioned the Microsoft Zune. The fun thing about doing a podcast is that you can see analytics on sort of how people are listening to the podcast. And we have one listener who downloads this very podcast onto a Microsoft Zune.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's still at least one out there.
Does this individual work at Microsoft?
Maybe they work for a machine tool company. So at the moment, the manufacturing kind of ecosystem is built around this idea of, specs and around kind of delivering incremental improvements. But it seems like then you're saying there's room for a wholesale improvement in the overall experience of manufacturing something.
Right. So at Inventables, what we're doing is reimagining the workflow that you have to go through to manufacture something.
Yeah. And so what does that entail?
It starts with software. We think about it from a user experience perspective, so the person using the tool, where a traditional manufacturer thinks about what is the output or the capability of my tool. Mm-hmm. It's not to say that what they're doing was bad, but it just it's a relic of an era where it was all about getting scale.
Right.
Right. And so when you're optimizing for scale, the user is not the first consideration. The throughput of the machine is. Mm-hmm. And so most of the machines we saw today, the number one priority for that machine is throughput.
Right.
With our machine, we're thinking about a new class of user and how they can now get access to this tool to get access to a mode of or means of production.
So you're saying there's kind of a cutoff point currently with all kinds of automated manufacturing where below a certain kind of volume, it's not practical to make it with automated manufacturing tools, whether that's a CNC mill or some kind of robotic automation or even 3D printing, but that with improvements in the overall experience, it becomes feasible to use automated fabrication tools and to run a business where maybe there wasn't a business before.
Yeah, there's a couple of aspects. So most of the tools that we were seeing today when we were walking around the IMTS show, at minimum they were $100,000 and up. Most of them are probably $300,000 and up. Maybe some of them are even millions of dollars. And so, yes, for someone to get one of those machines, you have to sell a lot of products that come off of it to pay that back. At Inventables, our X-Carve machine, it sells for $1,600. So that makes the machine available to a whole class of people who don't actually happen to have an extra $100,000 laying around in their pocket. But the cost of the machine is only one small factor. The fact that we've made software where you don't need to have CAD, CAM, and machine control knowledge, you can just plug in, you can use easel as a software. So you go to easel.com, it's free to try it or to use it. You plug your laptop with the USB cord into the machine, and now you can carve. You click carve, and you're going, right? So that has made it so most of our customers are not coming with a machining background. They're not coming with a mechanical engineering background or a manufacturing engineering background. They're coming with a background in a domain that they're excited about and know something special about. So maybe they typically tend to be specific. So they're guitar makers. They're toy makers who make toys for kids who go to Montessori education. They're people who know about Apple accessories, right? So they're like these very specific niches where a large company would have to write off that market because it's too small.
Yeah. So let's talk about a few other ways that you can kind of like divide users of machines.
Yeah.
Are these generally people who have been manufacturing something already and have expertise in manufacturing something like a guitar or an Apple accessory, and now they're able to automate it? Or are they people who have an idea for a market that they want to address, and by using a new kind of tool, they're able to produce for it for the first time?
Yeah, so it's the latter. So our customers, typically what I hear is they have an understanding of a specific market because they're in it in some fashion, either as a customer or they work in the industry or they're passionate about it. So they have some sort of insight about the market, and then they're getting our tool, which gives them a means of production to produce something for that market.
Okay. And then in the other way that you often divide kind of manufacturing tools, fabrication tools, you talk about certain things as prototyping tools and other things as production tools.
Correct.
So an interesting thing that you start to see when tools become less expensive is that they start to get into the hands of more people within organizations that design things. A lot of big companies have had kind of a prototyping lab, a model making lab, something like that, where you maybe send a job off and you get it back a few days later. But now that desktop fabrication tools are available, individual engineers and designers can have them on their desks. And so you start to sort of blur the process of design and prototyping, and then maybe you could also think about these tools blurring the line between prototyping and production as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're a computer programmer and you had to email your code to somebody else and then they put it in the thing and then they emailed your code back and like that's how you could iterate, you'd be like, this is crazy, right?
Yeah.
If you're an artist and you had to like send like the paint colors that you wanted and then they came back and gave you like the next version, like it's just ridiculous, right? So being able to have firsthand access to the tool that you're making the thing on allows faster iteration cycles, different creative ideas, right? It's not just about the production of the part. There's a lot of like the iterative process that gets to happen that otherwise wasn't.
Yeah, a lot of designers and engineers think about manufacturing as a constraint, and perhaps with greater exposure to the tools and more access to the tools, they could think of it more as an inspiration or an input.
Yeah, so like there's this concept of, it's called DFM, design for manufacturability, right? Because what happens is the designer designs it, and then they bring it over to the reality of the manufacturing, and the manufacturing people are like, if they only consulted me, this would have been much better, right? So, potentially the concept of DFM will be happening more and more in the designer's mind because they're having that firsthand access to this digital tool, and they'll start to have that instant feedback. And so we see that a lot with our customers where they're doing almost a cost optimization or yield management on the material because they have to pay for the material.
Right.
So they're like, man, if I could make this with less material, then hey, I would make more money.
Right.
And so, or if I could change the material from a more expensive one to a less expensive one. So I think you're going to start to see a lot of that DFM happening earlier in the process because the designers and the engineers are getting that firsthand experience with the tool.
So it becomes more integral to the design of the product.
Exactly. And I think the software is also going to start picking up some of those things and recommending them to, well, because all the data, like when it's a digitally manufactured design part and a manufactured part, like the software knows.
Yeah. And it's something that I think has taken a remarkably long time to come, that you now have CAD software that's integrated with a CAM environment of some sort. And I think this was a major advance that Autodesk made with Fusion 360, which is solid modeling software that also has a CAM environment in it. So you're not just constantly exporting a file and then importing it into CAM software. It makes the iteration faster. But it totally makes sense that eventually, you would include the constraints of your manufacturing process in the design environment, even as you're sculpting and even as you're modeling, to help you think about sort of what you're able to do.
Yeah, so Autodesk is a partner of ours, and we're big fans of Fusion 360. The concept that we have with Easel is similar, except we're not trying to, we're almost trying to make CAM invisible.
Yeah.
Right. So if you were trying to use a Word document and print it, and you had to do your own postscript, that would be crazy.
Right.
But in the early days, you did.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're trying to take an approach which is like, hey, why are we asking people to do CAM?
Yeah. Why are we asking people to look over G-code headers?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
So Easel actually runs in a web browser, right?
That's correct.
What did that involve, developing that?
Being very specific or clever with how are we going to do CAD, CAM, and machine control in the browser. So far we've been building it for 4 years. Our goal with it is to give more access, right? So the reason we did the browser was because, then you don't have to install anything. Then you don't actually have to own a machine. Then you don't have to buy the software. You can just casually try it. And so our goal is to try to get you carving within 5 minutes of using it for the first time.
So at Formlabs, we have this idea that the desktop 3D printers are kind of eating the industrial 3D printers. They're becoming more capable, and they're so much less expensive than the industrial 3D printers that you can run hundreds of desktop printers in parallel for less than the cost of a single industrial printer. You get much better throughput, much better cost performance.
Yep.
Do you see CNC machining going in the same direction?
I think eating is the wrong concept. I think what's happening is similar to what happened in book publishing. So in 1977, there were 100,000 books published. In 2010, it was about 3 million. But
titles, you mean?
Titles.
Yeah.
But of those 3 million, 300,000 went through the traditional channels, which was Random House and all those publishers, and 2.7 million was on demand. So I think what's going to happen is these small machines are actually going to create more demand for the large ones. But the high volume, high scale, the concept of manufacturing being in this high volume, high scale thing is only going to be for a smaller subset of the products as opposed to all the products.
Right. So there'll be a whole new class of products maybe that satisfy markets that were previously too small.
Exactly. So that's exactly what's happening now is our customers are serving those smaller markets that big companies would be like too small.
Yeah. I mean, you go on like Etsy and you find people who are making a living, basically manufacturing things that are either custom or that are serving a really niche market.
Yeah, so Reverb is another example. Reverb is a Chicago company. They're a marketplace for musical instruments. And you can go on Reverb and get parts for guitars that aren't made anymore. You can get whole guitars, you can get amps, it's unbelievable. And the experience of getting something on Reverb is very different than going to to Guitar Center and getting the high volume one, right?
Right.
We have a customer who makes, like, you basically tell him what kind of custom guitar you want, and he'll make it for you.
And like, what are the parameters? I mean, what was keeping that from being a reality a few years ago?
I mean, just ease of use of the tool and cost of the tool, right? He spent $1,600 on our machine, and the software he's using is free.
So speaking of tools, I'll ask you the question that I ask everyone who comes on this podcast.
Okay.
I ask everyone, what is your favorite tool?
Okay. So my favorite tool is my notebook. So I have 2 notebooks, actually.
Okay.
One is for taking notes, and I do them in sequence, and I just write down everything. The second one, it's a lined notebook, and on one side, it's in each line I have a person and a conversation I need to have with that person. And on the right side, I have tasks. And those 2 notebooks, they go with me everywhere. It's not on the computer. It's real paper. I use a pen.
Is this a system that you learned somehow, or you invented it?
One of my friends shared, it was his system, and he shared it with me, and I've been doing it for about a year now, and I love it.
The listeners might be interested to know that Zach Kaplan is exceptionally fast at returning email, and I'm
well, thank you, John.
Yeah, and I'm curious to know if there is like a system behind that, since you're someone who like has a system for organizing your thoughts and your to-do list.
Yeah, so the system for returning email as fast is I changed my orientation around what email is.
Okay.
So I think of email as a communication platform, not as a task list.
Okay.
So I try to actually clear out every email in my inbox to 0 every night.
Yeah.
So I drive things like complicated conversations out of email and into conversations.
Okay.
I drive tasks into that little notebook. If I can have a conversation rather than returning the email till it gets, I'll do that, right?
Okay.
So I'm trying to minimize the number of people that are waiting on me.
Yeah.
There's almost 50 people at Inventables now. And so every minute that goes by where they've sent me an email and they're waiting on a response, like we're preventing progress in the company. And so my orientation is to eliminate all of those times to 0, essentially.
Right.
Same thing, like, you emailed me and said, hey, would you like to participate in this event? I just made a decision and moved on, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that there's any value in me having the mental load of deciding if I'm going to come to the Formlabs event
right
for more than those few seconds. Like, I'm either going to come or I'm not.
I think a lot of us, including me, have trouble sort of about being precious with email and like wanting it to be an extremely well-written, kind of like fully formed thing. And whenever I've released myself from that obligation, I've found myself getting much more productive.
Yeah, so I've driven that kind of writing to docs.
Okay.
Right. So if I think something warrants that kind of response, I'll say, hey, can we create a doc? And so then I'll have more time to be more thoughtful for my response and just use the email more as a transaction or a conversation about the thing as opposed to the thing.
Yeah. So Zach Kaplan, CEO and founder of Inventables. Your products include things like the Xcarve and Carvey and Easel, the software that ties it all together. You also sell a materials library that's really cool, makes a lot of stuff accessible to users who might not otherwise have access to the kinds of things that you sell. I've been a customer in the past. If listeners want to find you online, where should they look?
They can go to inventables.com or easel.com.
Okay.
Check us out.
Zach Kaplan, thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, John.
Be sure to listen to the other episodes in this series, interviews with Spencer Wright from The Prepared and Elizabeth Koprucki from the University of Chicago. And go to digitalfactory.xyz to download the Digital Factory Report. For the Digital Factory podcast, I'm John Bruner.